You read the title right. The worst, or at least one of the worst iPhones, is also my favorite device. The iPhone 5C, call it what you want, whether it be an iPhone 5 cheap or just seeing it as a repackaged 5, is still going to be a device I will always like. But before we talk about that, why don't we go back to 2013, when it was initially released. 2013 was a significant year for iPhones. The 5S was a really revolutionary device. It came with a brand new A7 chipset, which was the first 64-bit chip for iPhones, not to mention Touch ID and the release of iOS 7. Of course, the 5C, branded as the most colorful iPhone yet, also came with iOS 7, but that's pretty much the only similar thing they have. But take an iPhone 5 and a 5C, and that's where the lines start to blur a bit. You know how the 5 has the A6 chipset and everything else that makes it up? Well, take that, put it into a plastic housing, and there you go. A new iPhone using year-old components. The only difference is that the battery was slightly increased. Apart from that, the features that it claims to have was more of what was brand new in iOS 7, not just the hardware. From the technical specs, it's nothing to really boast about. Unlike with newer devices where something even like the A9 chipset is still pretty capable. And that is only 3 years newer than the A6. But why? Why is this device the one that I prefer? Not even a normal 5? Well, for me, the 5C reminds me of simpler times. As Apple stated in advertising for the 5C, it contains the essentials that an iPhone needs. Sure, the features of the 5S and beyond are handy and nice to have, but the 5C gets the job done. And 7 years later, the A6 chipset on iOS 10 is still quite capable now as it was back in the iOS 6 and 7 days. Personally, the 5C was a true upgrade for me, since at the time, I was still rocking a 4S, and while I love the 4S, at this point, it was nice to have something a bit newer. The performance and speed it provided on iOS 10 was incredible. It felt like a brand new device for me. I had used it as a daily machine for at least a year, and I still use both it and many other devices, including other 5Cs, quite often. Now the 5C design, while pretty uniform, is still quite timeless, since it will most likely be the last iPhone made entirely with plastic, at least the housing, which we know that Apple isn't too keen on doing anymore. Something about the environment? Who knows? Call it nostalgia or just remembering the good parts, but the 5C was really a big upgrade for me at the time. It was a great device and it introduced me to iOS 10. I kinda skipped out on the iOS 9 days since I stayed on iOS 8 with the 4S. And ironically enough, iOS 9 is one that I really like, despite never really using it at the time. I guess I'm just lucky that I got the 5C before needing to update my 4S. Now the 5C isn't perfect, but it doesn't need to be perfect. It gets the job done with enough conveniences that older devices tend to lack. I'm not saying you can't use them, but it's definitely easier to use. So what's the future for the 5C? Well, it sure isn't getting iOS updates anytime soon. It didn't even get 10.3.4, but it didn't need it unlike the original 5. The fact that there is also an 8GB version is hilarious. It's the last iPhone to have 8 as an option. Now support for iOS 10 is still pretty decent. It is surprisingly already 4 years old at this point, but you can still use a lot of apps no problem. Jailbreaking is also an option, but you can get by without it yet. But there is always a lot more things you can do if you jailbreak. As for downgrades, despite using the A6 chipset, it never natively supported iOS 6, so it's pretty difficult to downgrade. It's a 7-year-old device, but it's by no means not unusable. Plus, the 4-inch display is nice since smaller phones seem to be making a comeback. There is still a lot of life left in them, and while they may be old, they aren't obsolete. Even this budget device, which wasn't necessarily successful, still sold millions of units. So that's my take on the 5C. Will I regret my words once I eventually use it for a week? I say it would be pretty mixed, but also pretty decent. What do you guys think about the 5C? Did you ever use or do you still use one? Were you all in on the 5S instead with the all-new Space Gray? If you stuck around for this long, I appreciate it. I enjoy making videos like these and I can't wait to make more. That's pretty much it for now. Be sure to support the channel if you guys liked the video, and check out the Discord and the subreddit in the description below. And thanks for watching.